I was excited this week when I heard the news about the proposed $6 trillion budget cut. But then I found out it still won't balance our budget for years. Even a decade from now, we'd still run $100 billion deficits every year. So I'm glad that Senator Rand Paul has a plan that would cut even more. It would balance the budget in 5 years. Senator Paul, what do you cut that other plans are too timid to cut?
Yeah, well, I think what we're finding is that Washington really hasn't woken up to what the Tea Party and the country wants. The president's plan will add about $11 trillion to the debt over 10 years. Congressman Ryan, I think, is trying to do the right thing, but his plan will add $8 trillion to the debt over 10 years. We need to do something much more dramatic, or I think we're in for a world of hurt as this debt crisis comes forward.
Congressman Ryan doesn't eliminate whole departments, but you do. You'd get rid of the education department.
I think it's the only way you can actually come up with significant enough cuts. And there's a couple of reasons. One, there's no constitutional authority for the federal government to be involved in education. But number two, there's no evidence that the federal government being involved in spending $100 billion a year has done anything to change test scores.
You want to get rid of the Department of Energy.
The Department of Energy, almost all of it could be gotten rid of. It interferes with and takes away our choices on what kind of showers we want, what kind of toilets we want, what kind of light bulbs we want. So most of the Department of Energy is superfluous, and it really is an impediment to producing energy. Not one barrel of oil is produced by the Department of Energy, but the Department of Energy stops a lot of oil from being produced.
You'd eliminate the Department of Housing and Urban Development. People assume poor people would go without homes.
Well, I think the Housing and Urban Development's probably torn down more houses than they've actually built. And really, I don't think it's been good for or eliminated any poverty through the years.
You'd get rid of the Department of Commerce. You quote a former Commerce Secretary who said the department is nothing more than a hall closet where you throw in everything that you don't know what to do with.
Exactly. And the other thing is I think it galls the American taxpayer that the CEOs of large multinational corporations, average salary $7.5 million a year, are being flown around at our expense on government jets doing business deals. I'm all for trade, I'm all for business deals, but companies should pay for this. There's a lot of profit in these corporations, and they should pay for their travel, not the taxpayer.
Maybe we should rename the Department of Commerce the Department of Corporate Welfare, because they give all that money to big companies.
Absolutely. There's a lot of welfare. People think of welfare as only going to poor people, but a lot of it goes to rich people. I've watched your take on the flood insurance that goes to a lot of rich homeowners who have beach houses. So you'll find that a lot of government welfare is actually going to subsidize those who are actually quite wealthy.
Yeah, I feel bad about taking that money, but I took it. A smaller one, eliminate the government printing office is in your plan. But without that, what about the Squeaks comic book? I was stunned by this one. The government prints these comic books. It's supposed to excite kids about printing. They cost more than $10. The government tries to sell them. I don't know if they sell any for $5, so they'd lose $5 a comic. Why does government do these things?
Can you imagine a government sells something for half of what it costs to produce it? Sounds like government's not very good at business. I always tell people over and over again, it's not that government is inherently stupid, although that's a debatable point. It's that they don't get the same signals. Businessmen and women have to make a profit. Government doesn't have to, so it's inherent that everything they do will be inefficient.
Now, one thing that puzzled me in these big plans that are being attacked by Democrats, both the Republican Study Committee and Congressman Ryan's plan don't cut defense beyond what President Obama says he's cutting.
I tell people that there's an inconvenient truth, and the inconvenient truth for conservatives is that you cannot balance the budget if you eliminate all the non-military spending. So you will have to say, yes, I do believe in a strong national defense, and I do. I think it's the #1 constitutional function of government. But it doesn't mean that all military spending is sacred or that all military spending is well spent. if you're a serious conservative and if you seriously want to balance the budget, you will have to look at cutting some of the military spending.
Your budget quotes Dwight D. Eisenhower, who said, "We will bankrupt ourselves in a vain search of absolute security."
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And the thing is that, you know, here's a guy who truly did serve his country, believed in our country, believed in a strong national defense, but he warned us very carefully about the military-industrial complex.
But I assume your Republican colleagues who want to cut spending, they're not just trying to get money for their district. Why is this not on the table?
Here's the thing when you look at it. When recently we had an FAA bill, there's $400 million, not that much in a $3.7 trillion budget, but $400 million for essential air services, basically to subsidize small airports and travel, usually to airports where congressmen live near the airport. We couldn't even get all the Republicans to vote against that. And my point on the floor was, if you can't cut $400 million, how are we ever going to balance a deficit of $1.6 trillion?
You would cut billions more from the Agriculture Department, get rid of the Agriculture Research Service, the Foreign Agriculture Service, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. People hear that and they think, we'll go hungry.
Well, I think most of the problem in our country, really, we have an overeating problem as opposed to an undereating problem in America. And what I would say, you can help those. There are people in our country who have absolutely no money. The more local, the better, and we can help people, but we shouldn't be. You know that a lot of these food programs are underutilized, so we pay people. We pay government agents to go out and advertise, please come and eat the free food, because not enough people are coming in to eat the free food.
Your budget quotes Thomas Jefferson. "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to the Constitution. I mean, an article taking from the federal government the power of borrowing." I mean, we'd be in deep trouble if we weren't able to borrow.
Well, you know, Jefferson had it right when he said government's best that governs least, because government is ineffective, inefficient, and really doesn't spend money wisely. So we should give very little money to government, as little as we possibly can, and leave most of it in the private sector. So Jefferson had it right.
In our next segment, a progressive will say it's the borrowing, the government investment that's given us the internet and all kinds of wonderful medical research.
Well, you know, if you look at the $1 trillion that President Obama spent in a stimulus package, you divide it out by job created, it was over $400,000 per job created. So if you're creating $20,000 a year jobs, but it costs you $400,000 to create that job, my guess is that's not very good or efficient use of capital. So I say send it back to the people.
Well, thank you, Senator Paul.
Thank you.
His plan and Paul Ryan's weaker plan are not going to happen this year, according to all the political experts. After all, Democrats control the Senate and the White House. And thank goodness those cuts won't happen, say progressives, because those cuts would wreck people's lives. We'll fight about that when we come back.
They propose no revenue. They only propose cuts and schemes.
This will do terrible damage.
This Republican path to poverty passes like a tornado through America's nursing homes.
That's how some Democrats reacted to Congressman Paul Ryan's budget plan. Many on the left call the cuts a terrible idea. And one of those lefties is David Callahan. He's co-founder of the progressive think tank Demos. Also joining us is Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute. So, David's plan sounds weak to me, if anything. We should cut more, but what do you say?
Well, this plan is Robin Hood in reverse. It imposes $3 trillion in cuts on the weakest, most vulnerable people in this country and gives a big tax cut to the richest people. So, you know, the average person making over $1 million would get a tax cut of $125,000 a year from this plan. Because while we're cutting food stamps, we're cutting Medicaid, we're cutting Medicare, it's Robin Hood in reverse, coming on the heels of an era in which the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten, you know, shafted.
That we've heard. But what you're talking about is the supposed simplification of the tax code, which would lower the top bracket from 35 to 25.
Right.
You're on?
Well, I think I agree with you. I think this plan is way too weak. We're running a government deficit that is enormous, 1.7 trillion, as you've seen, and it gets much, much worse as we project.
But he'll say tax the rich. You could make up for it.
You cannot. You could raise the taxes by 100%. You still won't make up the difference. And of course, we know that once you raise the taxes, the rich change their behavior, and you don't actually get the revenue. But look, there's a moral point here as well. I think it's fundamentally wrong to be taking money from some and giving it to others. And to the extent that we reduce that, and to the extent that we reduce the amount of redistribution that's going on out there, that is a good thing. And we need to change the entitlement mentality in this country. The poor need to start thinking about taking care of themselves as they grow older and stop relying on the rich to take care of them.
David?
Well, you're against redistribution,
yes,
but this plan would be one of the biggest redistributions in U.S. history. Upward. We're taking money from the poor.
It's letting them keep.
It's letting them keep. That's not a redistribution. You're not stealing money from the poor. You're giving them less.
No,
and we need to end that.
Well, let David.
I mean, just look at the Medicare piece. This is going to double out-of-pocket expenses of Medicare for seniors when that voucher plan kicks in. It's going to, take food stamps away from the poor. I mean, what kind of country?
If that's true, the seniors are the richest group in America. So we're giving them 2 to 3 times what they put in Medicare. Well, they ought to pay more of their share.
There's millions of seniors who live in poverty, and most seniors rely on Social Security for most of their income. And that entitlement system has been one of the great successes in American history.
But it's unsustainable. It's going off the cliff.
Well, actually, my organization has put out a budget plan which would balance the budget by 2018, and it would do it in a sensible fashion by cutting the defense budget by $1 trillion in the next 10 years, which is feasible, raising those taxes on high earners, and going back to the rates under Clinton, which, by the way, was a period of great economic growth. I mean, there's no evidence that high taxes on the rich reduce economic growth. We've had repeated periods of high growth in this country and high taxes on the rich.
Doesn't it change rich people's behavior?
Well, during the 1990s, we increased taxes on the rich, and they got a lot richer. We had a period of boom. We had, during the post-war era, a top tax rate of nearly 90%, and that was a period of great economic success. So this notion that somehow too much government spending decreases growth is not shown in our history, and it's not shown cross-nationally.
Well, of course it has. I mean, and if somebody is as left as JFK realized that by cutting taxes in the 60s, the 90s, the benefit we got in the 90s, the economic growth.
When taxes were at 90%, almost nobody paid that.
Yes.
There was so
and the fact is that over history, taxes are a constant percent of GDP. But look, this debate is ultimately going to be about the role of government. Should the government do defense? Yes. So that shouldn't be the first thing we cut. I agree, it should be cut. But it shouldn't be the first. Should government be involved in massive redistributions of wealth across people? No, that's not what this country was founded. That's not the principle on which
he says. There are poor people suffering.
But the poor people suffer more because of the redistribution.
Ron, we've had a massive increase of wealth at the top in the last 20 years.
Absolutely, and that's a good thing. That's because we produced incredible amounts of wealth. These people increased their wealth because they're being productive. Now, to the extent that that's not true, it's the extent that the government intervenes. Let's cut corporate welfare. I'm all for that, and I don't think the Ryan plan comes
close
both
to doing enough cutting agriculture.
Back to the plan. The way out of this mess is to share the sacrifice, increase taxes on people who can most afford it, cut the defense budget, and get rid of some of those.
Even if you do that, it doesn't solve the problem. And it still doesn't change the very fact that what we have today is an enormous injustice in this country, where a growing number of Americans are living off of the work of other people. And we need to end that. And what we need is for an American who's born today to expect to have to save for retirement. What a concept. To expect to have to save for his own health care spending as he grows older, and to stop relying on my tax money.
I have to stop here, Yaron. Thank you, Yaron and David. Coming up, 3 cheers for Congressman Paul Ryan and the Republican Study Committee. No, 2, actually. I'll explain that when we return.
The economists tell us, when your debt gets to 90% as a share of your economy, you start slowing down and we stagnate.
We stagnate, or we have hyperinflation, or we start breaking promises we made to the old and the sick. So 3 cheers for Congressman Paul Ryan. He's actually forced the political class to confront this. Finally, they've been spending us off the cliff. We're approaching a time when just the interest on our debt eats all our money. His plan offers some great things. A simpler, less burdensome tax code. Top rate 25% for individuals and businesses. His plan repeals Obamacare. That would be good. It would end corporate welfare. No more bank bailouts, no more handouts for Fannie and Freddie and windmill makers with political connections. His plan makes the social safety net sustainable. It's not sustainable now. Now it's open-ended and going broke. But by converting, say, Medicaid to block grants, I know the term block grants puts you to sleep, but they're a good thing. They let the 50 states experiment so we can see what works best. And because they're a fixed amount of money, they'll take us off the road to bankruptcy. So, 3 cheers for Paul Ryan. No, 2 cheers. Tonight we pointed out that even his $6 trillion cut doesn't get us to a budget that's actually balanced until maybe the year 2040. But balancing the budget isn't that hard to do. We just should think about the basic question: what is the job of government? What should government do and what should government not do? Should it fund and regulate local schools? Why? That's not a job for the federal government. Do we need a commerce department, an energy department? I don't think so. What should the military's mission be? Defense spending doubled over the past decade, even if you exclude the cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Why? Do we need to have troops in 100 countries? We do now. The politicians are finally starting to address entitlements. Great. But the Ryan plan doesn't include reforms like raising the retirement age. When Social Security was created, most Americans didn't even live to age 65. Now that most of us live to almost 80, Social Security at 65 is ridiculous. Indexing the retirement age to lifespans is just common sense. Ryan would reduce the federal workforce by 10%, the Republican Study Committee by 15%. That would be a good start. I'd prefer 90%, but I'll take 10% if we can get that. But the Republicans make their cuts by attrition, not layoffs. We'll just wait for people to retire or leave. Well, that's not management. In the private sector, companies fire people, and that is good. It's part of the creative destruction that makes us all more productive, and often even helps the fired employees because many end up in places where they're more valuable. Jack Welch built GE into a giant growth company by firing 10% of his workers every year. Of course, progressives call the private sector's management cruel. When anyone in government proposes cutting a social program, they scream, poverty, starvation.
In one of the bills before us, 6 million seniors are deprived of meals. Homebound seniors are deprived of meals. People ask us to find our common ground, the middle ground. Is middle ground 3 million seniors not receiving meals? I don't think so.
Give me a break. The elderly won't go without meals. The elderly actually are richer than the young. And they have Social Security, state governments, local governments, families, charities, churches. They help people much more effectively than our bloated federal government ever has. And anyway, the current system is just unsustainable. What's Pelosi's plan? More spending. That's irresponsible. Paul Ryan is right to propose a path to prosperity. I just wish they were bolder and got us there sooner. But that's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. Good night.